Hi, Benji.
Hello. How are you doing, Benji?
Hey folks, doing good. How you all doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Feel like I have to join Michael in party mode.
In party
There we
mode?
go.
Yeah, well, let me see what I can do. Ah,
Hello.
Are you even changing colors?
Hey.
Yeah, I have to upgrade.
oh, that's too much.
Oh. So, are we all having hue or?
I think so. Yeah.
Not for me. Mine's Whiz, which is from Philips.
Yeah, it's the
I
same.
actually-
Like they renamed. They were called Philips Hue at some point. Now
No, they're
I think Wiz is like the more like the generic version. Like it doesn't require a hub. Is
Yeah.
that the?
that's right. Yeah, they're Wi-Fi based. Philips bought them. They're
Ah.
separate from Hue. They're like a
Ah.
completely separate thing. They're cheaper. That's why I have them.
I expected you to be the one which buys the LED strips separately from the controller, and then you have your Raspberry
Got the
Pi
Raspberry Pi in the cupboard. Yeah, yeah.
with the Unix on it, so that you can connect to your lights by CLI and stuff like this. But
I would expect a GraphQL API for your lighting system. It's like,
I've not had time yet, but it's on the list.
yeah.
Yeah, well, look at what Martin did. It's already a federated graphical API. Each light has its own subgraph, and okay.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone is experimenting with like home automation through GraphQL.
Well,
No.
we should definitely get Home Assistant to have an integration for sure.
Yeah.
But it's all complicated. If you ever, it's like I tried. It's
It's a time. As soon as you start
Yeah.
with automation, you have another thing that you have to do in your weekend, which is already full.
I did, yeah. I had Home Assistant on Raspberry Pi before I had kids.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's why I don't have LED strips and stuff. There are quite a lot of people on this call, and there are, I think, 5 people in the agenda. I'm not in the agenda yet, so I will fix that myself. If anyone else is not in the agenda, please do add yourselves.
Yeah, I put the link in Slack, so it's one click.
Silence.
Are we expecting anyone else? Do we know?
I don't think so.
All right, in which case, let's get started. Cool. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the November 2024 edition of the Composite Schemas Primary Working Group. By being here, as always, we have agreed to the specification membership agreement, the participation guidelines, the contribution guide, and the code of conduct, links to all of which can be found in the agenda file. First of all, let's go for a round of introductions. We'll go through everyone in the order that they are in the agenda, and then anyone who's not yet in the agenda can introduce themselves afterwards, starting with me. Hello, everyone. I'm Benji.
I am Michael from jQueen.
Hey, Shane from Apollo. Jeff is next.
I think that's me, maybe. Jeff from Apollo.
Yep.
Hello.
I'm Derek from Apollo.
Pascal
Martin from Apollo.
I'm Steven.
Yeah, I think
coming
we
from
merged
video.
Pascal out of the.
Thank you.
We'll bring Pascal back later, no problem. All right. Thank you, everyone. Can I get any volunteers for helping to take the notes today, please?
Yep,
I will also
can help.
attempt to help with this. Thanks, Shane. I appreciate that. And if anyone else can also contribute, they are live notes. Anyone can contribute. They're just a live Google Doc. So whilst me and Shane are talking, that would be great for other people to contribute too. Okay, on today's agenda, we will be looking at the discussions from the previous meetings like we usually do. And we will then be discussing changing the meeting time, which I think is really more a case of changing the time zone of the meetings from UTC. Also potentially adding Camille and Pascal as maintainers, reviewing general progress, and talking about merge algorithms. Is there anything else that anyone feels should be on the agenda?
I've seen just FYI, I've seen that Shane, you opened the contributions pull request.
Yes. Small minor thing if we want to talk about that at the end. Or
We
can
can we can add that too.
Yeah, let's pop
Okay.
that in up front just after we've summarized the previous meetings. Unless, Michael, you want to do the summarization of the previous meetings along with the review of progress.
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, let's do it that way around then. I'm just going to have a quick look to see if there are any action items. There are no action items, so we can skip that part. Okay, let's start with Shane then. Shane, do you want to talk about what we just mentioned?
Sure. Yeah, I'll just from last week's meeting, I just added a contributing.md file because there was one in particular thing we mentioned where we said when we're building the spec, we should follow this pattern. And so I tried to write that down. And that pattern was that we should use like e-commerce retail type of examples and types. So that's all I literally wrote down, and I just copied over also how you contribute to this repo from the README over there. So if anyone else has any other ideas of what should go in the contributing.md file when you're writing the spec, like I don't know if there's a way of maybe we should link out to the spec language and all that stuff. I don't know if that is somewhere else, but that's another place we can put those things. And I think they might come up when we have these things like specific composite schemas, things we should be doing in the spec.
Yeah, there was. I think it sounded good. Like the idea was, like Benji, who was not here, that we are consistent in the examples and consistently use like the e-commerce examples that you also find in most federated examples, so everybody knows what we are doing there in the examples. I think like it just needs formatting, and I think there was a line missing between the header, but for me it's good.
Yeah, it looks like there's a markdown typo on line 6 as well. But yes, generally from a very quick scan, looks good, and I approve of adding contributing guides. Please make sure you have a look at the main specification contribution guide and see if there's anything worth pulling out from that as well. But yeah, I'm in favor of anything that helps guide people and is centralized documentation rather than being just things that we know, but things that other people can easily read up on. That's always positive. So yes, thank you for taking that work on.
Yeah, I think we should backlinks to the add a backlink to the work group as well. I'm not sure if there is one in there, but just tell people that before they like spend days working on pull requests, it probably makes sense if we just talk about it first.
Yes, contributing should definitely mention the working group, and it should also probably link out to the YouTube playlist as well.
So a follow-up question, we already have that in the README. So
No.
probably having in two places doesn't make sense. So the README should just link to contributing thing, right? I would say.
I think that's wise, yeah.
Okay, I put those as a note, as comments on the PR. I'll edit those after I'm done. It's pretty small. I can take care of that.
Perfect. Thank you, Shane. So we'll pass over to Michael. You want to talk about potentially changing the time of the meeting?
Yes, that was the discussion that Martin actually brought up, but I'm also in favor of keeping the time that we had in Europe. Like 6 would be much better for me. It's 1 hour later. I wanted to discuss it here because like Stephen and Derek are in other time zones. I don't know if it's there good as well, 1 hour later, or if we should keep this one.
I think Steven and Shane are on the West Coast, so that's like 8 a.m. their time. For me, it's either way, it's fine.
But for me, the an hour later is better. This conflicts with school drop off.
Okay, so that sounds good.
I can
Anybody
make-
against it?
No, I can make either time work for the most part. I move stuff around.
Okay, I think that's a yes.
So is the proposal to change to the Central European time zone or a different time zone?
So it's just 1 hour later the meeting. That's the consensus.
Okay, but then when the clocks change again early next year, it will change for daylight savings again. So do we want to pin it to a wall clock time as Martin suggested over chat?
Yeah, let's CET is fine.
We're just UTC, but we change it twice a year.
Yeah, then we do have to think about it then in time. It always creeps up on you.
Yeah, the problem is if it's that if we pin it to one time zone, then it might be bad for the other time zone for at least a couple of days, a couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's usually I think 2 or 3 weeks that we're out of sync.
Yeah.
I think that's unavoidable, like regardless of what time zone we
Yeah.
pick for the
You're right.
meeting.
If you try and change it partway through the year, A, that won't work with all of my automations for filing the actual agendas. And B, it's going to mean that the calendar actually has to be physically updated. Whereas what we can do if we choose a time zone is just change the time zone in the calendar, which is currently UTC for this meeting, but it's like we've got a couple of other time zones that we use for other meetings. So yeah, I think choosing a time zone and just sticking to that would be the best way forwards. If we're going to make this change as well, when should it start? Should it start next week? Should it start next month?
Next week.
Right now, we pause for 45 minutes.
Okay, Michael, if you take on changing the WG utils configuration,
yes, I will.
I will make the relevant changes to the actual library to support that. I think it's literally one line change, but we'll see. And then we can regenerate the upcoming agendas, and that should all be fine.
Awesome.
Okay, excellent. All right. I think that concludes that discussion. Are you clear on what time it's going to be, Michael, and what time zone?
Yeah, 6 p.m. in the Central European time zone.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so next topic is Michael again. You want to talk about adding Camille and Pascal as maintainers to the spec repo. Please go ahead.
Yeah, that's mainly to. At the moment, I'm basically the only maintainer that can move around stuff. And so we are more flexible, and I'm not blocking people from doing work there. I would add Pascal and Camille, but if anybody else wants to help or wants to be a maintainer from this group, then you can also speak out.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like to help out, but I'm also happy opening pull requests.
Yeah,
I'm happy doing things either way.
I mean, it's working in the pull request is just sometimes a bit of a pain. Where I run into issues is when we discuss spec text, because I see Michael in person twice a week. Then we discuss things, and I do a change to his pull request, and I can't push, and it's super annoying.
Yeah.
So then we add Martin. You want to be at as well? Then I add you to the list because.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly, I expect to open pull requests for most changes, because I do want to discuss things asynchronously with people, but maybe there are circumstances where it's helpful to be a maintainer on the repo as well.
Yeah, just for people to know, it's a 2-week process. So it's not like you need maintainer rights and you get them a day later. So if you want them, you have to know.
Oh, it's that complicated. Okay,
no, we just
yeah.
The idea is just it's okay. It's just that we will post it to the TSC. So as a notice, we are adding maintainers to this GraphQL repository. We do the same thing for if you become a maintainer for GraphQL.js. If nobody objects, basically we will add you.
Yeah.
So there is no complicated process. It's basically just we announce we do that, and then typically there's no objection.
Yeah.
I never
But
have
then
seen one.
then it might be best to add me as well to the list.
And the main idea, so we still work all in pull requests.
Yeah.
The main idea is that you also can accept merge basically pull requests, and that is not only pinned to me or Benji. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Michael just said then, which is everything should be done through pull requests. But this does give you the ability to, for example, self-merge your pull request, like open it and then immediately merge it. At least people still get notified when you do that. Also, as Pascal was saying, it's a great way of contributing to someone else's pull request without having to wait for them to get back to it, kind of thing. So yeah, it's very a useful tool. Yeah, that sounds fine. Michael, you're a TSC member, so I'll leave you to submit the relevant stuff to the TSC, but I don't see any issues with that whatsoever. At the end of the day, it's just a repo that controls text. So what can go wrong? It'll be fine. Yeah, this should be done just for clarity for everyone. This would be done by adding you to a team. So I think we'd need to create a new team for composite schema spec maintainers or something like that. And then people will be added to that team. And that way they will probably get maintainer rights on both the spec repo and the working group repo, which also means that people can merge in their attendance to the working groups more rapidly as well, rather than waiting, for example, for me or Michael to do that merge.
Excellent.
Awesome. All right, that sounds great. So next up, we've got Michael with summarizing our previous meetings and reviewing our progress.
Yeah, it's just because I added all these topics. Okay, so review. Yes. So the last couple of weeks, we mainly worked on the composition part, not really on the composition algorithms, but more on merging things. And what turned out to be very difficult is how do you validate if you can merge an enum and what strategy we use for merging enums. That at least took two and a half meetings. But since we have moved on to other complicated merge rules like empty, like how we deal with empty objects that become empty because of configuration, because you're using inaccessible on fields and things like that. And that also brought a lot of reflection from the Apollo team about how they're actually doing it in Apollo Federation and how we want to do it in the composite schema spec. So we had a lot of people actually throwing ideas in, and there were also from the community, which I liked a lot, were members checking in and contributing ideas to that. Apart from that, Pascal and I have tried to incorporate these in the pull requests that we have open on the merge rules and merge these through, or at least 2 are now merged through. There's a couple more to do. I worked personally also on the inaccessible directive that I have opened the pull request, and still there's more work to do on that to describe that, because that's also one thing that we discovered in the last meeting, how the different directives actually work. There are directives that you can put on a type that basically then are inherited to the fields. And there are directives that influence also other subgraphs, or basically the output graph that you have at the end. So this was kind of reflecting on how do these subgraph directives actually work. That's a bit from the meetings we had. If anybody wants to chime in.
Yeah, maybe a little side note, just to clarify that quickly with the enum merging rules, where we spend a lot of time thinking about it. We didn't have like an outcome which I would say that's the way we're going to do it. It's more like we're going to do it strict at the moment, and may loosen it up in the future when we have better ideas, because it's a really complicated problem, and there's multiple ways to solve it, and none of them is perfect. So we'll just go with the strict version at the moment and then loosen it up. It's the same thing that we will approach with all the validation rules that we will encounter in the future. We'll go for the strict one, merge this one, that this one is in the spec text, because having 50 pull requests open for validation rules it's not maintainable anymore, because as soon as you merge one, you get merge conflicts with the other, and it's just super annoying. So we have to get them in, and then we can review them and change them in the future when we know more about it.
Yes, and that's like we know we will change the one with for enums, but it's also nicer in the history to see why we changed them and what are the thoughts at that point in time. Okay.
On the type versus field directive, we don't need to discuss that right now, but I just want to add that I also opened up an issue very quickly to kind of describe the problem as well on the spec. So if we want to share that with other members more broadly, get more public comment from that. I think this is one that's going to be like a big discussion that I think a lot of people would have opinions on.
Yes. Also, like I started working on the text that describes the types of these directives, and because like when we talked about this last meeting, I think a lot of us just realized like implicitly we use these things, but then we just realized there are actually these categories of directives. And I think that's also what we kind of need to specify.
Okay, sounds like you've got a lot of interesting problems that you're working on solving. So thank you for all of the thought and everything that everyone's putting into this, and especially the sharing the existing knowledge, the problems and the solutions that you've come up with in the past as well. I think that's incredibly valuable as we move forward with this specification. Okay, do you want to talk more about the merge algorithms?
Yes, so we talked a lot about validation, and there's a lot of work going on there. Let's have a look at so at the moment the structure is, this is also something basically from last meeting. We have now pre-validation and post-validation. And in between the merge, right? Pre-validation is mainly things that we can reject already before we do the work of trying to merge something. Basically, we look at the subgraphs in isolation and reject certain things. And then we have post-validation. This, I think, for instance, the empty merge object type rule here, which looks at the outcome of the merge. And one outcome could be that we don't have any fields left on a type anymore. So what we haven't talked so far is really the merge process, or what rules, like how do we want to approach merging types? There's several things that are obvious, like you basically group types by name, and then you try to merge them through. Copy fields over, but there are a couple of also obstacles. What you do, for instance, with directives that are not repeatable, like there are many things in that direction, and that is a loose discussion I want to start today, so we can like get into the topic while still there is work done in the background on the merge rules.
I think one thing that might help is also kind of the declaring for everyone maybe the facts of the directives, because the directives themselves apply logic, but then there's also where that logic is used. Is it used at composition time? Is it used at runtime, etc.? And so that also impacts where the directive ends up. So maybe just let me clarify some of the merging. In particular, things like if we're just taking a type and we currently only describe it in Apollo Federation, because I think this is easiest for me to describe. If you merge a type and it ends up in the supergraph, all the different fields that are annotated within the type that's annotated in supergraph, if the router needs to apply any logic to those fields, it needs to have that metadata information in the supergraph schema. So things like the @inaccessible directive or things like the key directive need to end up in the supergraph schema. And so those things need to end up propagating through, versus the other things where maybe we just apply some logic and then that applies to how they get merged together or whether they can be merged together. And then the end result is just a field that exists in the supergraph schema. Those things don't necessarily need to apply. So the field itself could just be merged and then added in. So there are just different ways of how things get merged, and then what also ends up in the supergraph schema also matters in the result. And I think we would need to specify that to some capacity with some of these different rules and how we merge the types, and then also what appears on the different types and fields with those directives after.
So Shane, it's a good call out. There are different classes of the directives. I've been thinking about it recently. So just having the executable versus schema directive is not granular enough. But the ones that we are discussing right now for the composite schemas, they're all fall into the same category of extra metadata for the composition per se. So there is nothing there that would be actually influencing the execution of that thing. So by influencing execution, I mean, yes, in Federation, we have additional ones there that would be around like authorization or something like that. But that is not, we're not tackling those at this moment.
Yeah, I think another thing to keep in mind is that like during merge, we can also encounter situations where we actually have to reject the merge. So there are certain validation rules that we can sort of test on a subgraph in isolation before the merge. There are certain validation rules that we can apply to sort of the merged result, something like the empty object type. But there are also situations where the merge cannot succeed. For instance, if on the same type, there's the same field, but with a completely incompatible return type, there's no way we can actually merge those types.
I think we structured this way that we have the pre-merge validation rules exactly for this. So can you open the tab quickly there?
Oh, because I thought the pre-merge validation rules were meant to apply to subgraphs in isolation, so without knowledge of other subgraphs.
So the types, the validation.
Yeah, maybe this I misstated. Yeah, because we have actually. Yeah.
Oh, I've just seen that we have to put them into the names of the rules into.
Yeah, otherwise it removes
And
these.
stuff like this. But
we're gonna fix that.
The pre-merge validation rules would be to ensure. I mean, so I have thought about them like they ensure that they have the context of all the schemas, but they're not merged yet. So you can theoretically run on all schemas one check, but you can also run a check over all schemas because you have the context of them. They're not merged yet.
Okay.
You have all schemas available. So for example, we have several of them that check, for example, that the object types are actually mergeable. And they run before the merge. And if we run into an issue in the merge, then it's either a bug or a missing validation rule. So that was the idea, that we have these checks before, so that we don't run into, because if you run into a merge, if you run into an issue in the merge, you have to stop, most likely.
Yeah.
And that's a problem, because that means that when you have two validation rules, you have to run the composition, then you run into the merge issue, then you fix the merge issue, and then you run the composition again to run into the next merge issue. And with the validation rules before, we can somehow resolve this issue, as we say, everything should be mergeable after pre-validation. And then we can merge. Then we can collect all the errors in one batch, we merge, and then we can collect the other errors in batch. So you have at least 2 cycles of composition.
That makes sense. And I think what I was missing, and I now remember the discussion we had previously, we also have a validate source schema here as a separate stage, right?
Yes, you're right.
And that's the one that validates subgraphs in isolation.
Yeah, we should. So at the moment, this is missing. This is a task, Pascal. We should do like here, have an explanation text what this step is for, kind of explaining. This is looking at them in isolation. This is basically making sure that we can merge, but the merge output could still be something that you cannot work with. And this makes sure that the post-merge validation basically makes sure that what came out of the merge is structurally valid, I would say. It's not yet it's not yet guaranteed satisfiable, and that is then the last step.
Yeah.
But like it needs like here some explanatory text.
On about the one question about this post merge. So let's say if you have an interface and the interface is like distributed, so few fields are in one subgraph, few in others. So when do we actually check if all the types implementing the interface will have those? Is it like at the merge state or as the post merge state?
I think that's a post-merge validation.
Yeah.
It might even be a normal schema validation that we run on the supergraph in that specific case.
Yeah, it will be actually within the subgraph itself, right? Because if you define those interfaces there, you need to have all the implementations within that subgraph.
You can run it as pre-merge and you can run it as post-merge. It's just that the pre-merge validation rules always are very complicated, because you don't have one schema that you have to validate, you have many. And that means that the reason why there is a pre-merge step is that especially for the case of interfaces, for example, you have to merge to know what fields you have to define. And then you would write a pre-merge validation rule where you would say that give me all the interfaces with this name, then merge the interfaces to check if the type implements all the fields. So that's the prime example for a post-merge validation rule, because you would have to merge anyway in the pre-merge. So we just validate it afterwards. It's more like things that could actually mess up the merge is done at pre-merge, because they're much more complicated to write. As you see, the pre-merge are super easy. Indentation is wrong here, but anyway, it's more or less just you just specify that go over all types, do something. And in the pre-merge validation rule is always go over all the schemas, over all the types from all the schemas, give me whatever, and then validate. So it's much more complicated.
And is it like, in terms of an actual implementation of the composition, like, is the implementation actually bound to those three phases, or is it like flexible enough to, like, you know, apply it however we want?
It's just easier.
Mm-hmm.
It's just easier to write the specification this way. I mean, in the end, how you you implement it, I believe if the output is the same, you should be spec compliant, right?
Yeah, I'm thinking mostly in terms of like in the context of performance, but like anyway, the performance is actually will be affected by 99% by the satisfiability checking anyway. So
yes,
yeah, that's not an issue.
The thing about performance is the same as in validation, right? You can implement all the validation rules exactly like they are implemented in the graphical specification, yet as long as the output is the same, you're officially allowed to use a different algorithm to validate it. And that's also what libraries do, right? For example,
yeah, and you see that, for instance, with the field merging algorithm. Like if you do what the spec does, it's very slow. And then you look, for instance, at GraphQL Java, which has an optimized algorithm for that. So it's as long as you have the same errors coming out, it's okay.
I was more thinking of if we have this like three stages of like you have pre-merge that actually, you know, prevents you from even merging. But then if the spec says at the pre-merge you have to like expose those kind of errors, then, you know, maybe you implement it in a way that actually you do one iteration, collect all the things, and then the other one, you know, with the context of everything, or you do it like, you know, as you go. So then you don't have the full context. You're just like, oh, it's actually the composition is already broken, so I circuit break the whole validation and just show you like partial errors.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. It's just much harder to implement this way. And in specification text is always super annoying when if the algorithm is complicated to actually type it out, that makes it even harder to understand. So for performance doesn't matter in the specification. That's the reason why we do it this way. We probably also do the first implementation this way, just because it's much easier. You can just reference these validation rules. But then as soon as you go into performance, you want to optimize it anyway.
But I think Camille's point is also that by short circuiting, you might actually miss out on errors that would otherwise be generated.
Yes.
And is it like valid or not from the spec perspective?
Yeah, I would say it's valid because like in GraphQL implementations, you have often error short circuits. Like the validation, if you implemented the validation of the core GraphQL specification as if, then you could attack a GraphQL server to produce errors and kill the server with it. So a modern GraphQL server basically have an error limit, will stop on production with the first error they discover in validation, which is still a spec compliant GraphQL server. Just that you don't produce all the errors that the spec would produce.
If we're writing the spec, I think we should definitely write it as, you know, these rules are pre-validation rules. You should only need to, you know, there isn't a text, a rule in the spec that says you need to produce all these at build time and you must show all of them up front. I think we can just frame it as these rules are grouped together because you could possibly do that. And this allows us to write the text. We should have a little bit of that explainer up front to say why these are classified as pre-validation rules, because, you know, they don't require that we do all the comparison across the stuff and et cetera, et cetera. but there is no requirement that you must produce all 100 possible errors in one pass. Like if you err, as long as you produce a valid result when it's valid, and as long as you tell us there is some error when there is an error and it is the correct error, at least there is one correct error, then I think that's fine. I don't think we need to force implementations
Yes.
that they must do all that parsing.
Yeah, I think it's nice for depends. It's nice for the user to get like possibly most of the errors in one output, but that's about user experience, right? Could also be wrong because one error could kick off other errors, right? Where you have this waterfall of errors. So it depends.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that like the spec does not limit that aspect.
Anything
Yeah,
like this where there's questions over exactly what should happen in these situations, that's where you should leverage the use of should rather than must when you write your GraphQL spec text.
one thing, Benji, like in the validation section of the GraphQL specification, we also didn't point out that you don't have to produce all the errors, right? Because
Right. Actually, what's technically going on there is that you effectively are aborting the request. So you're not actually producing a validation result, you're producing a GraphQL result. And that GraphQL result is I decided not to run this GraphQL query. So you actually don't get analyzed as if it was a validation response, you get as if it's a bad query response. Which is fine because that may include any arbitrary error or errors so long as it doesn't have the data key. So yeah, we kind of sidestep that issue. You think of it in terms of we exit validation early, but in terms of spec text, it's just the same as the server just refusing to run it at all.
yeah.
I mean, we can also write something like on the lines of all errors in a validation or merge, all errors in the validation or composition should rise, but they don't have to rise at the same time. Like eventually you should get all errors, but it doesn't matter if you only return one at a time. But there shouldn't be the case, it should never be the case that there's an error in the validation or there's a schema that violates any of these rules that you let through. Right.
Yeah, I think that actually is more important, right? That you shouldn't have a path through when any of these validation rule fails. That's more important than producing all the errors in a given run.
Another thing to keep in mind when it comes to this kind of stuff is that errors themselves are not guaranteed. Effectively, the space that has no errors is the guaranteed space. The space that has errors is effectively reserved for future expansion. So we could make, like at the moment in GraphQL proper, when you have interfaces and you request a particular field that is not a property of the interface, but is a property of the subtypes, those fields with the same field name have to actually still have the same underlying type, like string or int or whatever. But we don't strictly need that requirement. At the moment, that produces an error as dictated by the GraphQL spec. But in a future release, we may get rid of that error. And that's totally fine. That is not a breaking change. So the fact that an error occurs does not mean that that error will always occur and that you can rely on that error occurring.
Yeah, I think that'll actually lean towards what we discussed about the enums, right? How we merge those so they have to match, but that would be an error. But eventually, maybe that's not an error.
Exactly.
Aim for the strict, and then we can loosen it up as we are more confident in a more relaxed rule.
Good.
Okay. Okay, so we need summaries. That's one thing I noted down for all these sections here. This was anyway like more skeleton at the moment. But it's good that we stumbled over these again. So I put some short summaries in the specification for next week, so we know then what these phases stand for. I don't know if we have to describe explicitly that you don't have to order them in these 3 phases, because we will anyway have this non-normative note, I don't know where yet, that the whole specification you can implement with different algorithms as long as the observable result is the same. This is not only for validation, right? It's also for parts where we go in execution, where we don't want to bind implementations to specific algorithms. Okay. Apart from that, any input? Otherwise, these were my agenda points.
Just a minor bit in terms of that sidebar is getting more deeply nested. I would recommend hoisting 321, 322, and 323 to be a tier up. So have pre-merge. Yeah.
And getting rid of this one, right?
Essentially, yeah.
It's good. Yeah, I will do that.
How do we organize them into what stage they are? So I see. Instead of merge source schemas, we say pre-merge validation, and then under this we have the output field types. That's fine.
Yeah.
I still think it makes sense to categorize them, not because, as said, we want to enforce the 3 different stages, just because from reading the specification, it makes a lot of sense that you actually get the introduction. Like everything that you read in this chapter now has the context of all schemas, but it's not merged yet. Then in the merge section, we say, we now merge the context of all the different source schemas. And then the post-merge validation rule is, you have now one schema and we operate on one schema, and then you have all the rules below, right?
Yes. Let's first merge all the stuff that's open on validation, then we hoist it. Otherwise,
Yeah, so little bit more about this. Here we now have 2 validation rules. We have over 20 in pull requests, and we will merge them. We just found out we're working on the validation rules always in the pull requests, and today we were like, let's quickly merge them through because we worked on them now in the validation rules. It's impossible. Like, as it's not like proper code, it's really hard to not get merge conflicts. So the first 2 validation rules that we have there that we merge together, we're actually intersecting between, there was lines and whatever. So what we'll do with the merge validation rules that we have open now is we will merge them and resolve the merge conflicts. I plan to add many more validation rules from the Apollo errors link that Shane posted a few weeks ago. But I will just do this in one pull request, because otherwise it's so annoying to merge. If we have them separate, then it just gets, because they're all in the same place in the code, and then they start conflicting with each other.
I think that's perfectly fine. What you have at the moment is not a complete functional spec. What you have essentially is an RFC document, and we already have a policy in GraphQL of RFC document changes just get merged really quickly with hardly any review. When people notice those merges, they should do the review of the pull request, and if they think things should be changed, they should then raise another pull request that includes the fixes. And that will help with your velocity. So I think that is the right way to approach this. Obviously, once the spec is actually like RFC2 status, that would no longer be valid. But right now it's incomplete. So it's totally fine to do this.
Yes. And that was also like the discussions we had in the group, because otherwise, if we follow the GraphQL spec or the HTTP process at this point. It would just take years to get an initial text out, and this way we can just move quicker.
Yeah, once you have like a first draft, it's a lot easier to iterate. Make
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah, then it makes much more sense because like you're changing a specific section, and yeah.
Stephen, I feel like you need to read out your comment from the chat.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we do need merge validation rules to validate the merging of the merge validation rules.
Don't agree.
Excellent point. Awesome. So I think you've got some feedback there, and hopefully a slightly faster process going forwards. Is there anything else that you would like input on?
No, for now, from my side, not.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I hope that we're gonna get through the merge quite quickly. Because we've talked a lot about merging, actually. It's not like we have no idea what we want to do there. We talked a lot about how we want to merge enums, how we want to merge inputs, how we want to merge objects. So we know a lot of the merge rules. We just have to type them down. So I hope that this goes through quickly, and then we can start with the interesting topics. Yeah, like the satisfiability rules.
Yeah, and what Pascal means was quickly like the initial draft. And there will be tons of stuff, I think, with interface implementations and object types and that we have to talk about on validation as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've checked what you have in validation in Federation, and it's certainly a lot of rules that are not yet in the specification. So I'll check what makes sense to add, and then I will add it just with the best understanding on how this works. And I think that the first time we actually see what's missing is when we first build the validation, the merge and the composition, and then see where the issues are. Implementing it will show the issues.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Excellent. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to discuss today? Because I think we're at the end of the agenda. No, nothing in particular. Okay, well, fantastic. Thank you, everyone, for all of your work and continued success with this project. It's really exciting to see everything still continuing to come together, progress being made, especially with these very challenging problems, not least the enums, which, yeah, sounded like an absolute nightmare. So well done for everyone on that, and look forward to seeing you again next month.
All right.
Awesome.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.